Shabbat, Shalom, and Maranatha. Welcome back to the Septuagint versus the Masoretic YouTube channel. Today we're looking at Joshua chapter 6. There are 27 verses. Once again, if you see the IG, it's not Instagram, that means ignore. So we're not going to look into those verses because, frankly, they're not worth our time in terms of it being a major difference that is significant enough that warrants investigation. In my opinion, at least. 1, verse 1, we have an omission of the word besieged. So talking about Jericho not only being shut up, being closed down, locked down, but also besieged. That's an omission that should not happen there. In verse 3, we have an addition of go round about. Go round about the city once, thus shall you do 6 days. And then an addition of, in verse 4, and 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns, and the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. So this is the story of the city of Jericho being blown up, the walls being torn down. Verse 5, when you shall sound the trumpet, versus when they make a long blast with the ram's horn. Shout together in unison in the Septuagint versus shout with a great shout. Perhaps not at the same time. It is not specified in the Masoretic. The walls of the city shall fall of themselves, versus and the wall of the city shall fall down flat. There's an omission of all the people shall enter. In verse 6, we see here, Joshua went to the priests. He went in to the priests. Versus he called them to himself. So it's one thing to go to the priests. It's another thing to call the priest to yourself. So we can see that Joshua is being active, proactive in the Septuagint. He's the one making the effort to go to the priests. This is verse 4 actually being repeated in the Masoretic text. So it says here. Okay, in the Septuagint, let 7 priests having 7 sacred trumpets. So that is described in verse 4 of the Masoretic. So there is a specific order and set of instructions that are given to Israel here. 7 sacred trumpets proceed thus before Adonai. I'll just say Adonai. And let them sound loudly, and let the ark of the covenant of Adonai follow. So that is, again, specific instructions in a specific order too. Versus the Masoretic, which is more vague and less specific. Let me read it for you. Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of Yah. In verse 7, these are instructions to the priests. It says here, charge the people to go around, versus Joshua himself instructing the people, not the priests, in the Masoretic. And he said to the people, go around, versus to pass on. Charge the people. Okay, so he's telling the priests to command the people, so you can see the hierarchy of authority there. Joshua, then the priests, then the priests to the people, as opposed to Joshua being the direct authority over the people. No, you have the priests kind of acting as the middleman in this situation. Verse 8, an addition of, it came to pass, when Joshua had spoken unto the people, the 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns, passed on before Yah, blew with the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of Yah followed them. So this detail was probably taken from the Septuagint. It is absent from the manuscript, but these details in verse 8, this verse that was added altogether, was most likely taken from the Septuagint. In verse 9, we see the continuation of instructions. Verses in the Masoretic, it's part of the narrative, so it's not instructions in this Masoretic. It's talking about what had happened as part of the narrative, part of the story. But in the Septuagint, it is clearly instructions that are continuing from the previous verse 7. So these are continued instructions from Joshua to the priests. It says here, priests bringing up the rear, versus and the rearward, which is the rear guard of an army. So it's not too different in that respect there. It says, they came after the ark, the priests going on the Masoretic. In verse 10, the Septuagint says, this is now Joshua commanding the people. That's what I wrote there. Versus the Masoretic, Joshua started to address the people in verse 7. No, he was not talking to the people yet until verse 10, according to the Septuagint. Joshua started to address the people in verse 7 in the Masoretic until he himself, is this referring to Yah or Joshua, to Adonai or Joshua? It says, until he himself declare to you the time to cry out, and you shall cry out. Verses, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I, Joshua, bid you shout, then shall you shout. So it's clearer in the Masoretic as to who is the one giving this instruction. It is Joshua, whereas in the Septuagint it is open to interpretation. I'm going to say it's Joshua though, because as we can recall in the Exodus 20, the people said, don't let Adonai speak to us anymore. So most likely it is Joshua. It's just using deduction there. In verse 11, there's an issue of punctuation in the Septuagint. So I'm going to read it as it is in the text that has been received here. The Ark of the Covenant of God, having gone round immediately, returned into the camp, and lodged there. But I have interpreted it, I've understood it this way. The Ark of the Covenant, having gone round, immediately returned into the camp, and lodged there. So we can see there's 3 steps that are going on. It's not that it went around immediately. No, it went around the city, and then immediately returned into the camp. So it's going around, and then it's separated from the second step. I guess you could see second phase, which is returning, and then phase 3 would be lodging there, as opposed to it being only 2 steps. Going around immediately, returned into the camp, and lodged there. So it's not one action, it's 3 steps. That's the way I understand it. Verse 12, an omission of on the second day. Okay, we're going to skip ahead to verse 13. Verse 13, we have an omission of, and the remainder of the multitude went after the ark of the covenant of Adonai. Verses, but the rearward came after the ark of Yah, the priests going on. So the remainder of the multitude were omitted, whereas in the Masoretic it's the rearward came after, which was identified previously as the priests. So no, it's not only the priest, it's the remainder of the multitude instead of the rearward. So we can see in the Septuagint the rear is the remainder of the multitude, at least in this verse. But in the Masoretic, it is the priests that are the rear. So the question I ask is, how do we reconcile these differences? How can we reconcile them? We can reconcile them because On the first day, you have the remainder of the multitude. They were not included on the first day. It is only until the second day that the remainder of the multitude were to be included as part of the rear. So that's an interesting observation. Verse 14, we have our first big difference of this chapter. It says here, and all the rest of the multitude compassed the city 6 times from within a short distance, and went back again into the camp, and this they did 6 days. Okay. Verses, in the second day they compassed the city once and returned to the camp, so they did 6 days. So how many times, the title of this video could very well be, how many times did they circle Jericho? I keep the titles pretty generic as Joshua 6 because I think it draws in more people. But the question is, how many times did they circle Jericho, the children of Israel? So in the Septuagint, this is how it went. Day 1, they went around the city 1 time. Days 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, they went around 6 times each day. So this is a total of 31 times, minus the 7th day. Okay, let's do the math. Day 1 is 1. Day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 5 is 30, 31. And then you subtract the 7th day. That's 31. However, if you include the 7th day, that is 38 times because they went around 7 times. 7 plus 31 is 38. So according to the Septuagint, the children of Israel didn't go around the city of Jericho, whatever the Masoretic is going to say, which we'll look into, but they went around 38 times, almost 40 times. If you round it off, it's pretty much 40. In the Masoretic, this is how it went. Day 1, they went around the city 1 time. Oh, let me just pause the recording. This is about to get shut down. Hold on a sec. Okay, welcome back. Sorry about that. So the question is, once again, how many times did they circle the city of Jericho? So in the Masoretic, it says in day 1, they went around the city 1 time. Days 2 to 6, they did the same thing, 1 time each day. So that's a total of 7. Actually 6, sorry. 6 times total. If you subtract the 7th day, okay, day 1 once. Days 2 to 6, 1 time each day. Days 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 6 times. Why did I put 7? That's a typo. So including the 7th day, they went around 14 times or 13 times. Because they went around, I believe, 7 times in the last day in both translations. 7 times, yeah, in both. Okay. So they went around a total of 13 times. That is a difference of 25 times. So they're burning a lot more calories in the Septuagint. So why is this important? Well, they really did have to put an effort to go around the city, that's for one. But I'm going to continue on with my notes. It is also important to mention there is no punctuation at the end of verse 13, meaning it was the men of war, the priests, and the rest of the multitude going around 6 times, because if the men of war and priests were not included, the people would be vulnerable to be attacked, and the ark would not be part of the procession as well. So that is a very important observation. That the punctuation that you see here, that period should not be there, probably more of a comma. The priest sounded with the trumpets, all the rest of the multitude compassed the city. So, the end of verse 13, okay. Right, so it is all these groups going around together. The men of war, the priests, the people, the multitude, the rest of the multitude. So why is that significant? I think numbers are significant in the scripture. I think we can see that clearly when it comes to numbers like 7, numbers like 40. And in this instance, it's not exactly 40, but it is 38. When you round it off, it is 40. So that would be my interpretation of it. Okay, there's an omission of from within a short distance. So they went around the city, but from within a short distance. That is a specific descriptor. It's important too. It's not just a little detail that's not important. It shows that they're not going around the city from miles away. They're actually very close to the city, close enough to make the people, the inhabitants of Jericho, nervous. They're visible. They're visible. They can see the citizens of Jericho can see this large multitude, millions of people going around their city. Okay, verse 15. There's an addition of about the dawning of the day. There's an added there. Another addition, only on that day they compassed the city 7 times, and this is self-evident because if you read the account, it does tell you that they go around the city either 1 or 6 times, depending on the translation you lean on. According to the Masoretic narrative, going from a day to 7 times might be a shock to the system. I was just using my common sense. So if you're used to jogging 1 mile a day for 6 days, that's okay. Your body you'll build up some endurance. However, on that 7th day, you all of a sudden go 7 miles. You're going to be in for a shock to your system. You may not be able to go the full distance. However, if you go around, if you go for maybe not a 6 mile jog, 6 kilometer jog every day, then doing the extra 1 kilometer would not be as difficult. So that's why it's just logical. Okay, I just don't believe the people would have built up enough endurance to go around 7 times if they're being trained to do one go around for 6 days and all of a sudden go around 7 times. We don't know how big the city is, according to the scriptures here. How many kilometers is that? Verse 16, it turns out Joshua told the people to shout, and that was my conclusion earlier, by deduction. Perhaps he was instructed by Joshua was. Okay. Or perhaps they were instructed by No, I don't think that was the case. Again, Exodus 20 seems to point towards no, they were not being spoken to or instructed directly by Adonai. It's Joshua being the middleman, just like Moses was the mediator in that time. Verse 17, our second big difference. Get ready. It says here, devoted. The city shall be devoted versus accursed. Okay, how can a city be accursed to Adonai? It seems accursed. It seems that way, but accursed may be a better translation. I have to admit, it might be a better translation. However, if we interpret this word devoted to mean devoted to destruction, in brackets, it can make sense. And we're going to see this in the following verses. We have an addition of because she hid, talking about Rahab, she hid the messengers that we sent. Verse 18, but keep yourselves strictly from the accursed thing. And you, in the Masoretic, and you in any way, in any wise, keep yourselves from the accursed thing. So they're both pretty similar there. Don't by any means do this, and the other one saying strictly, so they're both very rigid. What is the accursed thing? That's the question I ask here. The next question. Is it an idol? It seems to be something evil. Destroy us versus trouble it. So the difference here is Israel would be destroyed versus they wouldn't be destroyed. No, they would be troubled. just be troubled in their minds or emotions. Verse 19. So the accursed thing is not in verse 19. It is not gold, it is not silver, it is not brass or iron. Verse 20, all the people shouted at once with a loud and strong shout. Verses, and the people shouted with a great shout. So it's somewhat vague. What does that mean, a great shout? Whereas it's more specific as to what kind of shout it was, loud and strong. So those are auditory adjectives, versus great is just a vague adjective to use, not really related to auditory. And all the wall fell round about, versus the wall fell down flat. So this is all the wall. It's not merely a section of the wall. It's all of it. Every last piece of the wall fell. It's the totality of the wall. On verse 21, this verse confirms that verse 17 didn't mean devoted, not accursed, and devoted to destruction specifically. And Joshua, or Yeshua, devoted it to destruction. This was not a calf. This was not a donkey or ox or sheep. Or I should say this was not. Okay, what am I saying here? It's devoted to destruction versus this was not. This was not. Okay, so I'm not sure what I'm saying there is this was not. So it was not devoted? I'm not sure. Okay, continuing on verse 21, it says calf and donkey and ox. Versus ox and sheep and donkey. Okay, so the difference here is they're including ox. They're adding ox and exchanging a calf for a sheep. Okay, I think what I was trying to say here in verse 21, it was not devoted to destruction, is merely accursed. So being accursed is a different thing than being devoted to destruction in this case. And it actually says there in black and white, devoted to destruction. It's not just a guess I made, an educated guess. Verse 22, we're wrapping up in a few verses here. The two young men who had acted as spies, I think it's a typo there, as spies, versus had spied out the country. Okay, the woman versus the harlot. Not saying she's not a harlot, but it's just not what the text says in that specific verse. An addition in verse 22, as you swore unto her. Verse 23, we're going to look at and her kindred. Okay. So it's not her brothers or sisters, but it includes her extended family. And her kindred. Okay, so that was omitted. Brought out all her kindred. Her mother, father, brethren. All that she had. Brought out all her kindred. Okay, it doesn't seem to be a difference here. I'm not sure why I pointed that out. Extended family. Okay. Verse 25, spies versus messengers. She hid the spies versus the messengers. No, they weren't messengers, they were spies. Let's just be honest what they were. Verse 26, an addition of before Adonai. That rises up. That was added. We have an omission as well. So did Hozan of Bethel. He laid the foundation in Abiram, his firstborn. and set up the gates of it in his youngest surviving son. So it's not just the man. This is, it does say, "Cursed the man who shall build that city. He shall lay the foundation of it in his firstborn." And it's talking about the person who did do this. It's Hozan of Bethel. He laid the foundation in Abiram and set up the gates of it in his youngest surviving son. So this is talking about a specific individual who did do what you're not supposed to do, building the city again. Okay, last verse. "And his name was in all the land," referring to Joshua, versus "all his fame," or I should say, "and his fame was noised throughout all the country." So it's not just his fame, it's really his name, his reputation. So that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Till next time, Shabbat Shalom and Maranatha. This is the Septuagint versus the Masoretic. Please like and subscribe to this channel. We're going to look at chapter Joshua 7 next.